All right, guys. This is a world history review over all of chapter 23. This will be sections 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is the French Revolution, the rise and fall of Napoleon. So we'll begin talking about the three estates. Basically, what you had here was in France, you had the first estate and second estate, which were nobles and clergy members, the church. And then you had the third estate. And the third estate is the vast majority of the population. You're talking 98% of the population. You're talking, millions, 25 million or so Frenchmen that belong to the third estate. Now, the third estate was anywhere from a peasant, a common peasant, all the way up to a banker or a merchant. So they were middle class down to lower class. Very simply, they were anybody who was not a clergy member or a nobleman, okay? Now, the problem with the three estates, of course, was that the third estate was the only estate that got taxed. There was tax exemptions for noblemen, and there were tax exemptions for clergy, for the church. Well, when times get hard, and France has spent all this money helping America get their revolution, their freedom from Britain. They've got taxes to pay. They got bad harvests going on. There's some bad weather, and so people are starting to starve in France. They're getting desperate, yet they're the only ones bearing the tax burden. And this is too much for them to handle. They finally reached their breaking point. They called the Estates General, which is what the three estates were. The Estates General is called for the first time in a very long time in French history. And of course, very famously, if you remember, they end up locking the third estate out, and the third estate goes on to create the tennis court oath, and basically will split from the first two estates and form their own government called the National Assembly. Now, what you have is you have different groups of people. You have conservatives who want to keep King Louis XVI on the throne. You have moderates who want to limit his power and make it where he is not an absolute monarch anymore. And then you have the radicals, the Jacobins, who want to get rid of a king altogether and go more towards a democracy like America has. Well, the Jacobins are going to end up winning power, and Maximilien Robespierre, is the guy who's going to be the mouthpiece, the leader of the Jacobins. Now, eventually, he will kind of get tyrannical. He'll get a little bit of rabid dog fever and turn on a lot of people. He's going to use the guillotine to execute a lot of his enemies. This is during a time period called the Reign of Terror, when Robespierre is in control and his political enemies meet their end at the guillotine. Now, the Declaration of Rights of Man, I guess you could and the citizen, you could really put up here during the beginning of the French Revolution. Basically, it's a document asserting that people have, inalienable rights such as life, liberty, and fraternity. Basically property rights and stuff like this. Very similar to kind of America's view on things. Now, Bastille Day, they're going to celebrate. The French are going to celebrate this like their Independence Day, July 14th. They're going to storm Bastille prison. There's only 6 or 7 prisoners there, but the Bastille prison has a lot of guns. So the peasants are going to get their hands on some guns, and it's going to help them kind of overwhelm the first two estates. Make no mistake, there are a lot of people losing their lives in this time period as the Jacobins end up coming to power. Now, years go by, and France is still kind of struggling to make everything work, even under the Jacobins, who will end up finally turning on Robespierre. He'll be the last victim of the guillotine. And it's during this time period he's replaced with 3 consuls, these 3 rulers of France, who are kind of struggling to fix things. But around the same time, you have Napoleon, who was born in Corsica, an island off the coast of Italy. And Napoleon goes to French military school, graduates from there, and he's going to make his mark defending the Republic in this ingenious attack where he basically mows down a mob of people trying to overthrow the government. Then he's going to go into Egypt, where he's going to be successful in North Italy, conquering areas there. He gets all the way into Egypt, where he's has some success, but he's going to have a naval loss against Rachel Nelson there in Egypt. Meanwhile, people are whispering in Napoleon's ear that the country would be much better off if he could come back and run that thing like he runs his army. And Napoleon's a rock star. He's won so many battles. His name has become to mean something to the people. And so he does eventually go back, and in a coup d'etat, an overthrow, a sudden seizure of the government, Napoleon takes power. And, he's going to rule with two other guys, but in reality, he's really the honcho. Eventually, he will get rid of the cover, and he will just become dictator. Okay? And he'll be dictator for a few years, and then eventually he'll get rid of that and actually crown himself emperor. Now, with Napoleon, you should know the good things that he does for France. Things like a national bank, more efficient tax collection system, the lycees, the higher education, the fact that all boys, even from poor families, could have a free public education were important. And, of course, probably his biggest and greatest legacy of all was the Napoleonic Code. Now, with those things that Napoleon does to France and makes France the great military power in Europe, he also has a few costly mistakes, mostly born of his arrogance towards Britain. Now, his three mistakes you need to know. Continental system, he is blockading Britain. He figures that if he can choke off Britain economically, he won't have to fight them out there because, unfortunately for him, he'll fight Horatio Nelson, his old enemy, again at the Battle of Trafalgar, and he will lose this naval battle to Horatio Nelson. And the Battle of Trafalgar is going to establish supremacy for the English Navy for the next 100 years. Peninsular War, again, Napoleon has a lot of allies and people who are kind of sort of scared of him and on his side. Some of them are, in this case, Portugal, are still trading with Britain against his wishes. So he decides he's going to march his army through Spain on the way to Portugal to teach them a lesson. The Spanish are not too thrilled with this idea. They use guerrilla warfare to bleed Napoleon's army for a number of years, and upwards of 600,000 of his men are lost in the Peninsular War. And then, of course, he makes his greatest mistake of all. Yet again, one of his pseudo-allies here is trading with Britain, and Napoleon's got to go prove a point. So in 1812, he's going to invade Russia with his Grand Armée, upwards of 600,000 men, his greatest army, his best men, if you will. The Russians are going to employ a scorched earth tactics to, it's really the only way that they can fight Napoleon, and it's pretty successful. And they burn Moscow, so Napoleon gets there, really nothing to do, turns around, comes back. Of his 600,000 men, only 10,000 are going to make it out. So now Napoleon is greatly weakened because of this. He does raise an army, but the countries around him, like Prussia, Great Britain, Austria, they all pounce on him basically, and they're going to force his surrender. He is first exiled to Elba. He's not there for a long time. He gets news that the people don't like Louis XVIII very much, and they would love to see the general back in control. So he manages to escape. When he lands in France, that begins something known as the 100 Days. He will rule for 100 days before he is finally defeated once and for all at the Battle of Waterloo. The Duke of Wellington, this is the British commander responsible for handing him this great loss. The second exile, he'll be exiled to St. Helena, where he will spend the last 6 years of his life, and he will die from stomach cancer. So that's a very in the nutshell kind of review for chapter 23. But if you pay enough attention to that, you should do pretty well on your exam.